back in October, I decided to do Spooky Season, where every video I made was on a horror game to celebrate Halloween. Now, if you're a smart cookie, if you've got something going on upstairs, then you will realise that it is now November, so Spooky Season is now over. But I can't not make a video on the Silent Hill 2 remake. I had never played the original game, so I was very excited to play the remake and see what the fuss was all about. What I was treated to was one of the scariest games I have ever played that constantly kept me on edge and delivered a phenomenal, mature story with so much nuance that I have to admit, it's probably one of the best in gaming history. But what makes Silent Hill 2 so toe-curlingly scary? Well, that's what we're going to do in this video, so let's get started. So, there was one thing I knew about Silent Hill 2 before jumping in myself. One singular thing. It's very foggy. All I knew was that there was a hell of a lot of fog. The fog plays a central role in building the game's haunting atmosphere. When you enter Silent Hill, you are immediately enveloped by a dense, eerie fog that seems to stretch endlessly, concealing nearly everything within the environment. This fog isn't just a background effect, it's a psychological force, a veil that distorts reality and creates a sense of isolation. It keeps you on edge, hinting that anything could be lurking nearby, hidden just ever so slightly beyond your line of sight. When your radio starts going off and you know an enemy is nearby, but you can't see more than 3 feet in front of you because everything is just so damn foggy, it's really quite unnerving. As you navigate the town, the fog limits your visibility, and this lack of clarity forces you to rely on sound and intuition rather than sight. You might hear faint noises like footsteps or unsettling sounds without knowing exactly where they're coming from. This adds to your vulnerability and makes you question what's real and what's imagined. The fog also acts as somewhat of a metaphor for James's mental state. Just as he's searching for answers through the haze of his own guilt and grief, you experience his inner turmoil through the oppressive dreamlike fog that surrounds you. It's as if the fog has a life of its own, trapping you in a space that's surreal and inescapable, reflecting the haunting, unresolved mysteries of James's past. In the remake, this effect is amplified with more advanced graphics and dynamic lighting, which makes the fog richer, almost tangible. You'll notice how it diffuses light, adding depth and an unpredictable quality to each step that you take. This reimagined fog enhances the sense that the town itself is alive, like somewhat of a form of purgatory that reacts to you, pulling you deeper into its secrets. The result is a feeling that Silent Hill is less of a place and more of an experience, a psychological descent wrapped in fog, always concealing something terrifying just out of reach. This sensory distortion impacts your emotional experience deeply. As you wander through Silent Hill, every small sound and shape becomes a potential threat, as the fog keeps everything close yet out of reach. It's as though the town is breathing around you, always keeping its distance but never letting you go. In Silent Hill 2, sound is almost weaponized to keep you on edge. The ambient noise is sparse but incredibly impactful, filling the silence with a sense of dread. You'll find yourself surrounded by sounds that are deliberately ambiguous. Muffled footsteps, distant growls, rustling, screeches, but without ever seeing the source. This design plays on your mind, making you constantly question what's there, what's dangerous, and what's real. Each of these sounds is layered with atmospheric noise that feels oppressive, pressing in on you from all directions and creating an inescapable sense of vulnerability. A major feature of the sound design is the iconic radio static. When you're near a monster, the radio in James's possession emits bursts of harsh, grating static, signalling that a threat is near, but not exactly where or what it is. This isn't just a cue, it's a psychological trigger. Sometimes it goes off and it's just a bug, but every time you hear that static, your body reacts with tension, knowing that danger could be imminent, yet it's hidden somewhere. Even when there's no immediate threat, the anticipation that the static can start at any moment keeps you constantly on guard. The soundtrack also plays an essential role. The compositions are haunting, often blending elements of industrial noise, distorted melodies, and quiet, mournful tunes that reflect James's descent into his own grief and guilt. Instead of overpowering scenes, the music is woven delicately into the game's quieter moments, amplifying the emotional weight of James's journey and adding layers of melancholy and tension. In high-stress moments, the music becomes dissonant and chaotic, mimicking the spiralling mental state, pulling you further into the emotional turmoil. The lighting in Silent Hill 2 Remake is another critical tool in creating a terrifying, disorienting experience. Your primary source of light is James's flashlight, which has a limited beam and often feels like it is really fighting to pierce the dense fog around you. This limited light field means that most of Silent Hill exists in deep shadows, heightening this sense of isolation. The flashlight's light is narrow with a focused beam that creates strong contrasts between light and dark areas. Monsters often remain in the dark until they're too close, emerging suddenly as the light catches them, making each encounter jarring. The prison area especially is another world of darkness. I could not believe how dark most of that area was, and to put a cheeky bit of icing on the cake, it's filled with enemies that seemingly only want to attack you in the dark. In interiors, the lighting becomes even more oppressive. Rooms are dimly lit, with eerie flickering shadows that make the space feel more decayed and alive. Shadows bend and warp as you move, often exaggerating this claustrophobic essence of the narrow hallways and cramped rooms. This controlled lighting design makes you hyper-aware of each step you're taking, as if the darkness itself could hide threats that aren't immediately visible. This interplay of sound and light culminates in an environment that feels suffocatingly immersive. You're not just playing in a horror game, you're existing within a nightmare, where every sensory detail works to keep you psychologically unsettled. In the remake, these updated sound and lighting elements are taken to new extremes, pushing you into a world where the fog, shadows, and the sounds never fully reveal themselves. The atmosphere in Silent Hill 2 Remake is profoundly terrifying, wrapping you in a relentless, oppressive tension that makes every moment unsettling. The dense fog cloaks the town in mystery, limiting your sight and keeping you constantly on edge, while eerie distant sounds hint at threats lurking just out of view. Together with all these elements combined, the haunting soundscape, bleak lighting, the oppressive visuals, they create a nightmare-like world that traps you in dread, making Silent Hill itself feel alive, hostile, and inescapable. The story of Silent Hill 2 is profound and unsettling, delving into the deepest aspects of human guilt, grief, and self-delusion. Unlike typical horror narratives, Silent Hill 2 doesn't focus on external threats, but rather explores the protagonist James's inner struggles and the dark recesses of the human psyche. The themes of guilt, self-punishment, repression, and forgiveness transform Silent Hill into a twisted psychological purgatory where James's unresolved trauma and desires are mirrored in the monstrous world around him. The narrative follows James, who receives a letter from his wife, Mary, calling him to visit her in Silent Hill, a place they once cherished. But there's a haunting twist. Mary has been dead for years. As James searches through the eerie, fog-shrouded town for answers, the truth of Mary's death is slowly, painfully revealed. James is haunted by all of this, and the town of Silent Hill takes on a deeply personal role, reflecting James's repressed memories and inner turmoil. This psychological journey blurs the line between reality and hallucination, leading James to confront not only the truth about Mary's death, but also the darkness within himself. The brilliance of Silent Hill 2 lies in how this story is revealed. Rather than providing clear-cut answers, the narrative unfolds in fragments through cryptid encounters with strange characters and surreal environments that represent James's psychological state. This isn't an epical story, it's a lyrical story. This fragmented storytelling keeps you as disoriented as James, immersing you in his confusion, his fear, and his denial. It's as if the town itself is forcing him to confront the very aspects of himself that he's attempted to bury, creating a journey that feels intensely personal and introspective. Guilt and self-punishment are at the heart of Silent Hill 2. James's journey is driven by a need to atone for his actions. Though he may not consciously recognise it, Silent Hill acts as this sort of purgatory, reflecting his guilt through the horrifying creatures and decaying environment he encounters. For instance, the infamous Pyramid Head, a relentless and terrifying creature with a pyramid on his head, appears throughout the game, and it embodies James's desire for punishment. Rather than being merely just an antagonist, a Mr. X type, Pyramid Head serves as a symbolic executioner, representing the brutal self-judgment James feels over his perceived sins. The monsters James encounters are also deeply symbolic, often representing his repressed guilt, fears and suppressed desires. For example, the faceless nurses, with their erratic movements and grotesque forms, symbolise James's conflicted feelings about Mary's illness, intimacy, and his own guilt over his emotional and physical needs. This twisted reflection of his inner life forces you to confront themes that go beyond horror. Another central theme of Silent Hill 2 is the concept of repression, James's unwillingness to face the truth. Silent Hill takes shape based on the minds of those who enter it, and for James, the town's distorted reality is an extension of his own psyche. His encounters with other characters such as Angela and Eddie offer haunting glimpses of how trauma and denial affect individuals differently, making Silent Hill a collective space for those haunted by their pasts. Angela, for instance, is haunted by her own tragic abuse, and the town warps around her trauma, reflecting her suffering in ways that resonate differently to James's guilt. The subtlety of James's self-deception is masterfully handled through symbolic storytelling and environmental clues. Silent Hill only gradually reveals the truth, leaving you to piece together James's memories and regrets. This ambiguity forces you to empathise with James's denial, as he clings to the belief that he is in Silent Hill to find Mary, avoiding the seeming truth that she is gone, and that he landed the final blow in her suffering.
In that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else?
At its core, Silent Hill 2 explores whether redemption is possible in the face of overwhelming guilt. The game's multiple endings depend on how you guide James and interpret his journey. They provide different resolutions, some hopeful, others tragic. Those endings emphasise that ultimately, James's fate is determined by his ability, or his inability, to come to terms with his actions and emotions. Silent Hill itself is a mirror, a purgatorial space that holds up a reflection of each person's darkest truths and deepest regrets. The town doesn't punish indiscriminately, it adapts, changing based on the individual's psyche, showing James that monsters aren't external, they're born from within. By the end, you're left questioning not only James's choices, but also the nature of guilt, the possibility of forgiveness, and whether one can truly move past their darkest actions. It would be very easy for this game's big reveal to be some sort of black and white, morally sound aspect, but this game doesn't do that. There is a morality involved. James isn't this evil scumbag, it's much more grey than that. The remake's graphical advancement brings new depth to all of these themes by saying less. More nuanced facial expressions and lifelike character animations allow you to read emotion and subtext in every interaction, enhancing the impact of all of these themes. With its psychological horror and mature storytelling, Silent Hill 2 Remake remains one of the most profound explorations of human darkness and redemption in gaming. It invites you to face James's horrors as if they were your own, challenging you to confront difficult questions about guilt, denial, and the possibility of inner peace. Hi everyone, this is me. Look how cool I am. Just wanted to take a quick break from the video to say that if you're enjoying the content, then to please check out some of the other videos on the channel if they look interesting to you. You'd be doing yourself a favour if you really think about it. I even have a playlist with some of my best videos, so they're easy viewing. Thanks guys, back to the video. It's no secret that Bloober Team were going to have to shake up the combat in this remake, and they did. It plays quite similarly to the Resident Evil remakes of the past few years, in terms of the over-the-shoulder camera perspective and shooting mechanics, but it feels a little bit different. The combat in Silent Hill 2 Remake is carefully designed to heighten atmosphere of tension, vulnerability, and psychological horror, making you feel as if you're barely holding your own against this hostile world. Most of the time. Unlike most action-heavy horror games like Resident Evil 4, where combat skills might empower you, Silent Hill 2 places you in situations where fighting feels desperate and grim, emphasising James's helplessness and emotional weight. By combining subtle mechanics, unsettling enemy behaviours, and haunting boss encounters, the combat design reinforces these themes of fear, guilt, and isolation. James isn't a trained fighter, and the combat system reflects this through slightly clunky, a little bit unrefined controls that make each encounter feel uncertain and laboured, but it's a good kind of unrefined. The Alone in the Dark remake from earlier this year also had unrefined shooting mechanics, but it didn't feel by design, it felt bad, and that's not the case here. Weapons, especially melee options like the wooden plank and the steel pipe, feel unwieldy, emphasising James's lack of skill and his desperation. He grunts when he swings his weapons. It feels desperate. Every swing or shot fired feels heavy and final. You can't easily mow down enemies with a roundhouse kick, for example. Instead, every hit or shot is a calculated choice, often coupled with a sense of dread, as you wonder whether it's worth using your bullets or saving them for later. This slow, deliberate combat contributes to the feeling that James is always at a disadvantage, either physically or mentally, constantly teetering on the edge. The uncertainty in combat reinforces this psychological vulnerability, reminding you that he is just an ordinary person caught within a nightmare. Even the simple act of aiming feels tense because of the time it takes to focus. The reticle starts off wide and then very slowly becomes more precise, making every attack a risk. This keeps you definitely engaged, and it heightens the immersion, as every encounter could be James's last. Although there is one thing that flies in the face of this philosophy, and it's the dodge. You can dodge through attacks as long as it's timed correctly, and it doesn't quite mesh with the rest of the mechanics, as it makes you feel a bit too powerful. However, this is a tricky balance, as enemies lunge at you frequently and quickly, so you do need some method of defending yourself against this. Maybe a block would have worked better instead, I'm not too sure, but the dodge just feels too powerful. The monsters you encounter aren't just mindless threats, they're twisted reflections of James's psyche, and they add to the atmosphere by embodying his fears, guilt, and shame. The creatures move in unsettling and unpredictable ways. For instance, the iconic lying figure, which resembles a figure enclosed in a straitjacket-like membrane, crawls erratically, it can squirm on the ground, it often bursts gas. This erratic behaviour makes approaching it feel risky, and it reinforces a feeling of revulsion when you see one. Fighting these creatures often feels just off. The enemy's movements are deliberately designed to be disturbing. Many creatures move in unnatural, jerky ways, as if they're barely in control of their own forms. The nurses, again, they stagger and twitch as they approach, and they attack in different rhythms, I guess, to the other enemies in the game, which makes it more difficult to react to their lunges because they're timed off. This broken, lifeless movement pattern reinforces the themes of decay within Silent Hill, making every encounter just a fight for survival, but also a chilling reminder of James's inner demons. Silent Hill's design isn't about constant combat, but about punctuating long stretches of tense exploration with sudden encounters. You might turn a corner in a seemingly empty corridor only to face an enemy moving erratically towards you, breaking the silence and forcing you to react. Or you could walk through multiple rooms and corridors without encountering a single enemy where you expected you would have done. It creates a sense of unpredictability, so you can't guess, you don't know when you're going to be thrust into combat. These event designs keep you constantly guessing, making it really difficult to find a rhythm, reinforcing this oppressive atmosphere. And then there is the boss fights. We won't spend too much time on these because we are almost 20 minutes in. Jesus Christ! But these are some of the most harrowing parts of the game, each one representing a crucial aspect of psychological struggle. These battles aren't just about physical survival, it's deeper than that, you know? There's metaphors involved. For example, encounters with Pyramid Head are not about defeating him as a traditional boss. Rather, he embodies James's need for punishment and penance. Pyramid Head is relentless, often appearing in confined spaces where you have little room to manoeuvre, making you feel trapped and forcing you to confront James's demons. Other bosses like Abstract Daddy hold specific emotional and psychological significance. Abstract Daddy embodies the trauma of another character, Angela, and its imagery is just... with all the backstory, it's quite disgusting. The boss designs make each fight feel like a descent into the subconscious, with each enemy pushing you closer to an understanding of the internal conflicts going on, not just with James, but also with other characters such as Angela and Eddie. I've played many horror games, but few made me feel a sense of constant unease as Silent Hill 2 Remake did. It's an absolute masterclass in creating an atmosphere, and it's this consistent atmosphere that keeps the game constantly scary. Even if you get used to the enemies, the sound design will pick up the slack. If the sound design stops affecting you, the lighting design will pick up the slack. There's so many aspects working against you at all times, and it's genius. And all of this helps to support one of the most twisted, cryptic, and morally grey narratives I've seen in any game. Silent Hill 2 is not only one of horror gaming's greatest accomplishments, but one of this medium's greatest triumphs, full stop. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I hope that you did enjoy it. Remember, for October I did 4 videos on horror games, so go and check those out if horror is your thing. I assume it is if you're here, but for now, that's all from me. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, that'd be great. If you want to see more videos like this one, then you click the subscribe button, and then more will appear in front of you every single Monday. But for now, that is all. Have a nice day, and goodbye.
You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.